Last night, New York One, a cable news outlet, hosted a debate with 6 of the 13 congressional candidates for New York District 10. And you will not believe how the candidates answered when they were asked whether or not they support vaccine mandates for kids. Now, this was last night, not last year. Here's what they had to say.
So I'm going to ask you yes or no questions. Please just answer yes or no. Ms. New, do you believe the federal government should reinstate any federal mask mandates, for example, on airplanes?
Yes.
Do you support ongoing mask mandates on public transportation, like subways and buses?
Yes.
Should the COVID vaccine be required for public school children?
Yes.
Mr. Jones, same questions.
It's going to be tough for me to remember all three. So
do you believe the federal government should reinstate any federal mask mandates, for example, on airplanes?
If public health officials determine that that's appropriate, then yes.
Do you support ongoing mask mandates on public transportation?
Yes.
And should the COVID vaccine be required for school children?
Absolutely.
Ms. Simon?
Yes, yes, and yes.
Ms. Rivera?
Yes to all of the above.
Ms. Holtzman?
Ditto.
And Mr. Goldman?
I'm not a public health expert. I would follow the public health experts, but I do believe that every child in school should be vaccinated. We have to follow the science.
Okay, look at that. Every single candidate saying they want vaccine mandates for school children. School children, the majority of which have already had COVID and are at very little risk, practically next to no risk of getting severe disease or dying. And as we know, if we follow the science, the vaccine does not stop the spread. But there is actually one candidate who was not on that stage last night who does not support vaccine mandates for school children or anyone for that matter. Maron is the only candidate vehemently opposed to vaccine mandates of any kind, and who has consistently called out the refusal by New York officials to follow the science by advocating for policies that just don't make sense. As the only public school mother in the race, she has seen the damage that COVID restrictions have on New York City children. Maron is with us now. Welcome to the show. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks so much for having me, Kim.
So first of all, so you're the only public school mother in the race?
I think there's at least one other mother in the race. She was not invited last night either. But on that stage, the 6 people that were invited were, they all either don't have kids, 4 out of 6 of them, no kids, or the one person who has school-age kids sends his kids to private school. So they were all opining about other people's children.
Yeah. I mean, okay, so first of all, why were you not on that stage last night? I mean, and I cannot believe that debate happened last night. I watched that video and thought, this is for sure from a year ago, year and a half ago. That was last night.
Right.
Why were you not there?
So what I came to understand, because I didn't know why I wasn't there, and I reached out to New York One and asked them, and they said you had to have raised $500,000 or be a former or current public elected officials. Well, I haven't raised $500,000. Some of the candidates on that stage are self-funded. The guy who sends his kids to private school is a self-funded heir, so he has lots of money. So you can buy your way onto the stage. Or being a former or public official, I was the former elected president of the largest school district in Manhattan. It's a position that's governed by state law. I think New York One certainly should have acknowledged that we public school parents who serve on our school boards and serve countless hours trying to make our schools better, that we are elected public officials.
Yeah, I mean, that sounds like an elected position, especially, and an important one, especially considering parents are driving elections right now. I mean, we saw this in Virginia. We saw that it was the parents that came out, angry parents that turned the state back to red. So why wouldn't they say, hey, and what was your position exactly? You were
I was the president of Community Education Council District 2, which covers a big part of the congressional district I'm in now, in most parts of lower Manhattan. And I served in that position for 4 years on the Community Education Council. I was twice elected. I was the highest vote getter in 2019 when I was reelected to that board. And I did a lot of battle with our former mayor who wanted to get rid of merit-based admissions and entrance exams for specialized high schools. There was a broad coalition of public school parents in New York who pushed back on that and who really didn't want that. And many of us who fought those battles around academic issues then sort of transferred into what we call open school moms and dads, but a lot of moms who fought to reopen our schools because they were closed for far too long. Some would argue they shouldn't have been closed at all. And once we got our schools kind of opened, Bill de Blasio, our former mayor, kept calling it the gold standard. He put our kids in cohorts, so they went to school on different days. The science of that made no sense because, of course, kids don't sit at home alone on the days they weren't in school. They had to be watched by other family members and so it made no sense. We weren't reducing the spread of COVID by denying kids hours and hours of school. And what drives me really crazy is that the same progressive mentality that argued so much for academic interventions to help children, particularly minority children who are doing less well academically, are the same people who argued to keep schools closed. And we know in New York City that the kids who bore the brunt of those school closures the most are poor kids, and often poor minority kids. So so often the progressive policies, and I say this as a lifelong Democrat who used to call myself a progressive, I don't use that word anymore because for me, it's come to represent some policies that are actually hurting the people that progressives claim to want to help the most.
What do you, I mean, where does this mentality come from? I mean, how do you, it's just so mind-boggling to me that all of these candidates on the stage last night were like, yes, vaccine mandates, knowing everything we know, with all of the people getting COVID, regardless of how many doses of the vaccine they've had. I mean, our own president of the United States and even Fauci, both of whom 4 times dosed, both of them took 2 rounds of Paxlovid, had rebound COVID. I mean, where's this mentality come from? Is it really that New Yorkers are that crazy? Because to the rest of us, it's kind of I live in Los Angeles where it's also pretty crazy, but it looks like New Yorkers are extra crazy. What's going on?
I think there's 2 things that's going on. One is that the candidates you saw on the debate stage last night are preaching to a very small choir. I'm in the Democratic primary. This is a weird primary year. We have an August 23rd primary in New York, which we normally don't because the redistricting fiasco in New York resulted in this, in a judge drawing our district lines. And now we have this late August primary. So the turnout's going to be super low. And you're going to get the sort of intense Democratic base voters who are a small portion of the people who actually live in this district and who will be impacted by these policies. So they're playing to a small voting base. And I'm talking to everybody. I talk to people on the streets. I go to neighborhoods, and people are so unhappy with what's happening in our city. But finding the mechanism to vote our way out of it is hard.
Yeah, they might be miscalculating, right? Because I think that there is definitely a minority that's very vocal. And they certainly have the ear of many of these politicians and many of our leaders, but they are a small minority, and even though yes they do come out to vote, others come out to vote as well. That's and I true. Think what we're seeing is there's a silent majority that is just fed up, and that is why we're seeing so many of these elections shifting, and we're seeing really approval ratings go down for Democrats in general, just because of not just for inflation, but as we saw in Virginia prior to inflation, anger over how the children have been impacted by the COVID pandemic. And so, might be a miscalculation on all of these other candidates' behalf, them thinking that, well, no, this is what everybody wants to hear. Right. And also we see the miscalculation. Also, another indication of that is the fact that so many parents did not show up to vaccinate their young children. That was something that they all thought, oh, this is for sure. They all want to come do everyone's screaming for the vaccine for kids. And then we've seen very little uptake for children, especially those under the age of 5. So they might be miscalculating on this. So how can people support your campaign? Now, the election, you said it's a special election, and this has to do with gerrymandering, like redistricting. Is that right?
Yeah, so in New York, we already had some of our primary elections. So the governor's race and the assembly races were in June. And now the state Senate races and the congressional races are August 23rd. If anyone wants to know more about me, my website is maudmaron.com. And you can reach me there. All my social media is my name, Maud Maron. So I'm very easy to find and very easy to contact. I agree with you, Kim, that there is a silent majority of people who are really frustrated. One of the reasons I was so frustrated to not be on that stage, well, one, I don't think New York would even follow their own rules because I am a former public official as the former school board president, elected, according to state law. I mean, that's a real message telling us public school parents that we don't matter and that our elected positions don't matter. But I'm really frustrated also because when people hear those 6 people up there say, of course, all school kids should be met, they think they don't have a choice. They think there's no option for what they actually believe, and it drives down turnout. So when people talk to me, when they meet me, when they hear me, they think, oh, she's saying what I believe, and she's speaking some common sense, a common sense Democrat. And that lets people know they have an alternative. And what you said about the uptake on parents, we don't have a big anti-vax group, population in New York. Some folks are opposed to other vaccines, but there's a real true difference between vaccinating for polio and vaccinating for COVID. My children went to a middle school called the Salk School of Science. Joseph Salk is the man who invented the polio vaccine. The polio vaccine means you're not going to get polio and you're not going to give it to somebody else. And Joseph Salk, it's worth noting, didn't make a penny off that vaccine. He gave it to the world for free because he knew how important it was. And that's not what we have going on now. We have a vaccine that these 6 candidates want to force parents to give their kids despite very legitimate concerns. If you're a mom of a 17-year-old boy and you think, I'm more concerned about his heart having a side effect from this vaccine than I am worried about him recovering from COVID, which he probably already has because most of us have had COVID. That's a really reasonable position. And to disregard that mom's concerns and to tell her she has no right to make that decision, it's just wrong. And parents need to have real alternatives.
Absolutely. Well, I hope you win. I mean, really, I hope you win. And I hope there are more candidates like you. I mean, it's just a shame that on that debate stage, everyone said the same thing, which is very anti-science as much as they were claiming to follow the science. There is no science behind what they were saying. There's no reason. And as you mentioned, many of us are not anti-vax at all. We have vaccines. We would give our children vaccines, but real vaccines, vaccines that as we understand vaccines to be, as we've grown up hearing what vaccines were, which meant if you got it, you were not going to get that disease. And that is what a vaccine is. And they've changed that definition. And so then when people say we don't want that thing, then we're called anti-vax. And that is absolutely unfair. So I hope you win. Good luck to you. Again, what's the website for people to support you?
MaudeMaron.com.
MaudeMaron.com. And I'll put that in the description down below. Maude, good luck to you.
Thanks so much. Bye-bye.